The United States military blockade of Iranian ports is now stretching into its third day as the White House continues its bid to put economic pressure on Tehran. U.S. Central Command said yesterday no ships made it past the blockade in the first 24 hours, adding that 6 merchant vessels had complied with directions by radio from U.S. forces to turn around and re-enter Iranian ports, although it did not identify the ships or the ports. CENTCOM also noted that the mission involves 10,000 American troops, more than a dozen warships, and an array of aircraft. As the Pentagon publicly portrays confidence in the blockade, there are signals, however, some ships may be testing the waters. The New York Times reports, citing ship tracking data, that one vessel under U.S. sanctions, the Chinese tanker Rich Starry, traveled eastward through the strait yesterday before ultimately turning around. Another Iran-linked ship also appeared to make it through the strait during the blockade, but the paper notes the vessel was offline yesterday, so it wasn't clear what its path had actually been. The Wall Street Journal, meanwhile, cites 2 U.S. officials who say more than 20 commercial ships not linked to Iran have passed through the strait over the past day. It's a fraction of what it was before the war, but still an improvement in flow through this critical waterway. Meanwhile, behind-the-scenes talks to set up more in-person negotiations between the U.S. and Iran are continuing. President Trump said yesterday negotiations could resume over the next 2 days, possibly being held once again in Pakistan's capital. That country's finance minister told the Associated Press that Pakistan's leadership is not giving up on efforts to help the U.S. and Iran end the conflict. Officials from Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Turkey all met in Islamabad yesterday to discuss the next steps in continuing to mediate this conflict. And then there's the way the president is talking about it, because in an interview set to air later on Fox Business, President Trump says the war in Iran is very close to over. Take a look at this preview clip where he makes the declaration after being pressed by their anchor.
You keep saying is this war over?
I think it's close to over, yeah. I mean, I view it as very close to over. You know what? If I pulled up stakes right now, it would take them 20 years to rebuild that country. And we're not finished. We'll see what happens. I think they want to make a deal very badly.
Here on set with me, national political reporter for the Wall Street Journal, Ken Thomas. Ken, is the war over because it's over, or is the war over because Trump has decided I would like to move on now?
Yeah, very interesting that he is talking about this in the past tense or alluding to the end. I mean, there are positive signs out there right now. You know, you mentioned this blockade. It seems to be working. U.S. Central Command said overnight that they have fully implemented this blockade. They've been able to turn away 8 ships without any kind of interdiction. So that's a positive sign. We also saw the UN Secretary General say we're probably likely to see more talks in the coming days. The president is certainly leaning into that idea as well. So, you know, the question is, though, what would an agreement look like? The two sides seem to be fairly far apart last weekend in Islamabad over the nuclear enrichment issue.
Yeah.
So I think that remains the major hurdle to ending this war. Is there some way of reaching an agreement? You know, there was some discussion about maybe a 20-year freeze on this. The president indicated in an interview that wouldn't be acceptable. So, you know, can they come up with some kind of package that would work for both sides?
Yeah, and I also think another one of the sticking points that was reported was Israel and Lebanon, and the fact that those two countries now are having pretty historic talks to end the conflict between the two of them. How does that factor into the U.S. and Israel's continued incursion with Iran? I think that's an open question, too. But then there's also the way that I have been struck by the way that senators and Republicans on Capitol Hill have sort of been shifting the goalposts of what it is to be successful here. It seems like they are readying sort of like a preamble to why this was already successful. And what they were saying to me yesterday is, well, if there's no missiles for the Iranians to put enriched uranium on, then they're basically incapable of having a nuclear program. I wonder if you see the shifting goalposts happening already, and if it's telling you the same story, that the White House is trying to breadcrumb their way to wrapping this up.
Right. I think they want to give the White House as much leeway as possible and more time to get this wrapped up. You know, we're likely to see a war powers resolution vote. Yeah. You know, at this point, Rand Paul seems to be the only Republican who, you know, is going to side with Democrats on that. But you do have this 60-day threshold coming soon.
Yes.
John Curtis, a Republican senator from Utah, has pointed to that as you know, an inflection point for him. You know, Tom Tillis is not too happy with this. So, you know, you could see if this drags out into the 60-day mark, some Republicans saying, hey, look, we have to curtail you here.
And that's a question that I and others was asking on the Hill yesterday, because the 60-day mark is basically the authorization of military force that this administration used to go into Iran, or rather do this initial air attack in Iran. That will expire. And I think I have not yet heard from Republicans who say, I want a vote on continuing this yet.
Correct.
But we may. So I think that's one of the pieces here. And then I think the other piece, too, is the economic factors, right? I mean, the concern about the blockade was that it would only cause prices to spike further. And it's an administration that was already having a crisis in how it was dealing with or not dealing with affordability.
Right. And what's interesting is while all of this is going on, the White House has been trying to talk about the steps that they are taking to relieve the pressures of inflation. You know, we had the image of the president greeting the DoorDash worker with McDonald's. You know, that was
Quizzing
about
her on policy.
Well, that was about no tax on tips, which is something they want to talk about. And then the president's going to be going out west later this week for a Turning Point USA event where he's supposed to talk about, you know, their work on the economy. So they really want this to be the message heading into the midterms, but Iran is just blocking everything.
And I thought it was also interesting when I listened to J.D. Vance at that Turning Point USA event, his in Georgia, was the fact that he referenced to the crowd of young people, I know that you're not maybe huge fans of this war in Iran. I recognize that you probably haven't heard great things about it, but here's why we're doing it. And again, it takes me back to, you know, several weeks ago when I think the question was, why didn't the administration try to explain this in advance to an American public that is skeptical of war in the Middle East that is protracted and without end?
Right.
I think the other question that we have about when a conflict is going to end, a much different one, but President Trump and Pope Leo is continuing to go after the Pope, posting late last night on social media. The president writing this time, will someone please tell Pope Leo that Iran has killed at least 42,000 innocent, completely unarmed protesters in the last 2 months, and that for Iran to have a nuclear bomb is absolutely unacceptable. Iran has acknowledged more than 3,000 deaths, while the UN estimates that number to be between 5,000 and 20,000. It's not clear what exactly might have sparked this particular message from the president. The Pope yesterday morning posted in part, quote, God's heart is torn apart by wars, violence, injustice, and lies, but our Father's heart is not with the wicked, the arrogant, or the proud. Also, I think it's important for us to point out here that I have not met anyone who is opposed to this war who is opposed to it because they're defending Iran.
Right.
I think that's a pretty important foundational piece to this. But the president is just continuing to go at this battle that is not really a clean win for him in energizing his base. I mean, conservatives are, if not confused, angry at what he's saying.
Yeah, this is a fight that supporters of the president do not want to have because Catholic voters they're not monolithic at all, but they were supportive of the president in 2024, and they have traditionally been a swing vote, and you really alienate those voters at your own peril. And the Pope just carries a moral authority here.
Yes.
And so I think, for the president to continue taking him on, I know there are a lot of people in his circles who just would rather not continue with that.
It's even gotten him in a spat with the Italian prime minister, who has spoken out against the way that he's speaking about the Pope, saying that this is not the way that he should be doing. And she was one of his closest allies.
Arguably his biggest ally in all of Europe. Absolutely
right. So interesting to see where that battle goes as we look to much more serious battles as well. National political reporter for the Wall Street Journal, Ken Thomas, covering it all. Thank you.